Hello, and welcome to Psychological First Aid for Young Children and Youth. I'm Dennis Dura, and I work in ACF as an emergency management specialist. I will be presenting the first module in this training series. Thank you for taking the time to develop these important skills that we hope will be valuable to you and help you support children and youth in distress. Before completing this training, please be aware that there are two mandatory assessments for you to complete. The first is a short pretest to capture your current understanding of the principles of psychological first aid. The second is a post-test knowledge check to evaluate your mastery of the material and capture feedback on this lesson. You can find links to both the pretest and the post-test in the email invitation you received from Jennifer Canistra, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy. Also remember that this is a pilot as part of ACF's Strategic Plan Goal 4 pilot project. We are testing this abridged training to see how helpful it is and what changes we can make to improve it. Your feedback is very important to us to make sure we make this as effective as possible. Here you'll find our objectives for today's training. Today we will provide foundational knowledge on how children and youth respond during adversities, disasters, and emergencies. Through exploring the principles of PFA, we are seeking to improve the competency of ACF staff and grantees to support communities to respond to the emotional distress of children and youth. As part of this training, we will provide you with a toolkit that can be put in a bag or pocket as a job aid and quick reference guide when working with children and youth. We will also provide you, as a caregiver or responder, with information on how you can manage your own stress when responding to children in distress. Throughout this process, we want to make sure that you are also taking care of yourself. Before we begin, we'd like to talk about self-care related to this subject. We know this is a very delicate subject. We know dealing with children in distress is not easy and causes all sorts of feelings, emotions, and reactions that come up for us. We know that everyone has their own life experiences, and we want to be sensitive to the understanding to the fact that my experience is different than yours. During this presentation, pay attention to your feelings in the context of your own experiences and be sure to take care of yourself. This might mean taking a couple of deep breaths or stopping the presentation and walking away from your computer. You know what works best for you. So why are we here? We have heard from many adults who are caregivers, first responders, grandparents, teachers, community members, and more that they don't always have the skills to talk to children and youth in distress. Frequent explanations include fewer opportunities to work with children, less time spent on training on children's reactions, the fact that children have unique physical and emotional needs, and the fact children can go from doing okay to being in an emotional crisis more quickly than adults. We cannot overcome all of the barriers to communicate with children, but today we will give you some skills to be the best helper you can be when you encountered a child who needs some support during a crisis. So what is PFA? Psychological first aid for children can be given during an emergency or immediately after a critical event. This training and toolkit provide information, strategies, and activities to help individuals respond more quickly and effectively to the emotional needs of children in distress or crisis. Practicing the use of these strategies and activities will improve your skills as well as reduce your own anxiety when working with children. This is not therapy or any psychiatric intervention. These tools can and should be used by regular people who are caregivers, teachers, grandparents, parents, and friends, and want to show up in an authentic way to support the children in their lives. Studies show that adequate support from family, professionals, and caregivers in a child's immediate environment are the most important factors for children's development and recovery from difficult experiences. Although the overall focus in this training is on children between birth and 11 years old, the training also contains activities on how to communicate with parents and caregivers, as they are also likely to be affected by the crisis event or emergency. Because of their unique needs and dependence on adults and other resources, children are among the most vulnerable during any disaster, crisis, or emergency. This is most true for our youngest children. There is no shortage of global crises and disasters that have affected children or adults over the course of the past 2 years. Large-scale natural and man-made disasters, war, terrorism, mass shootings, and a global pandemic have all affected adults and children in a profound way. These kinds of disasters can be particularly distressing for children. Disasters that result in widespread devastation can impact the whole community and can take a long time for things to return to a sense of normalcy. Children may experience the loss of security and routine that comes from a sense of place and permanency. It is common that children experience loss of what they once knew to be true about the world, themselves, and their family. Children who lose homes in a disaster often must relocate out of their neighborhoods, away from their friends, their schools, and sometimes even their family. Such disasters increase family conflict, domestic violence, mental health problems, and substance abuse. Even for children who are not directly impacted, these disasters have a significant emotional impact. More commonly, children may suffer through smaller but equally devastating emergencies and crises. Community violence, racial violence, bullying, the death of a student or member of the school staff, a severe playground or athletic injury, these can all disrupt learning and interfere with the daily routines that have an impact on the mental health of children. Sometimes the injuries that harm our children are not visible and might only affect a single child. Yet to that child, the stress and fear are as great as for those who have lived through a major disaster. Being prepared for the small emergencies and crises, you can better respond should a large event impact you, your family, or your community. One of the lessons learned from many crisis events, both large and small, is that in communities that are prepared to provide support for the mental health of children through things like psychological first aid, children are more resilient, and communities are able to adapt to support those most affected. Children experience disasters and crises differently than adults. Depending on their age, they rely on adults for protection, emotional support, to make critical decisions, and to seek out ongoing care. Their size makes it more difficult for them to escape dangers and puts them at a higher risk for exposure to hazards. Take a look at this picture. It was drawn by a 9-year-old child evacuated with his family to Denver after Hurricane Katrina. As I describe it, think about the risk factors that this child faced. This is a drawing of a house. Do you see the water? Where is the child in this picture? I see lightning and thunder and a tornado here. There are cars floating in the water. I see the boat that came and rescued him. Do you see the dogs? The child said, "My 5 dogs could swim very good, so we left them behind." Using art as an effective way to understand a child's experience and allow them to express their emotions, since they might not have all the words to describe their feelings at this time. We are hardwired in our brain to respond to emergencies in very specific ways. The fear reaction starts in the brain and spreads through the body to make adjustments for the best defense or flight reaction. This is the fear-stress response. When your brain encounters something that might be dangerous, it releases biological molecules that change things in your body, like increase to your heart rate and blood pressure, hyperfocus of your attention, acceleration of your breathing, and sweating. In addition to physical changes to the heart, respiration, and circulation, stress and fear affect the brain. Among the most significant changes, several parts of the cortex begin to shut down. The frontal lobe goes first, affecting our executive functions such as the ability to plan, judge, problem solve, and make decisions that control impulses. Next, the right and left temporal lobes shut down, reducing our ability to process and use language and regulate our emotions. While the process seems counterintuitive, it makes a lot of sense for our survival. The fear response prepares us to respond to danger immediately. Taking time to process information, make a plan, and decide upon a course of action delays our response and increases the opportunities for injury or death. While these brain changes support an individual's physical survival, they make interacting with them more difficult. Children will have difficulty following your directions, understanding your explanations, explaining to you what is going on. This is called language processing, and making decisions, which is part of executive functions. regulating emotions, and controlling impulses. Not all children who have experienced a disaster or emergency will be traumatized or in distress, but in order for you to be able to help a child, you'll need to recognize common child emotional distress reactions. These lists are not exhaustive, but it includes many of the common and typical reactions experienced by children. It is important to note that stress reactions are a natural and normal response to a crisis. Most children can recover. Brief interventions by adults, such as psychological first aid, can speed up that recovery process. Look these over and familiarize yourself. You'll find this information in your toolkit for quick reference when you are responding to an emergency or crisis. As you read through these, remember that reactions are influenced by past experiences, family, culture, biology, and mental health challenges or developmental disabilities. By recognizing common reactions, you can help identify those children that might need additional assistance or referral to a more intense intervention. Children's past traumatic experiences can influence their reactions to a current crisis. Some of the children and families you might encounter will come with histories that affect their reaction to the present emergency. Over 60% of children experience a potentially traumatic event by the age of 16. Children living in distressed communities with higher rates of community and domestic violence, alcoholism, child abuse, mental illness, and other adversities may experience multiple or complex traumas from an early age. If an event causes a child to experience stress beyond your capability to respond, don't be afraid to call for a mental health or health professional. If a professional is not available, try to work with a parent or caregiver to get additional help for the child, such as through a crisis hotline. In the event of an emergency, please dial 911. When we talk about trauma or dealing with trauma, we need to be mindful of a trauma-informed approach. A trauma-informed approach to care recognizes that people have been through trauma in their lives, and we need to realize that our services should not continue to traumatize victims. Trauma-informed care shifts the focus from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. The goal here is to provide services in a way that is supportive and appropriate for those who have experienced trauma. Now that we have discussed why we are here today, we are going to get into the psychological first aid training in Module 2.